All right, time now for a look at the French papers. Diptyka Laurent joins us on the set. Hi, Diptyka.
Hi, Will.
Beginning, of course, with a one and only presidential debate between Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen before the vote on Sunday.
That's right. It's the first time the two candidates were meeting face to face. They did, of course, do different debates before the first round of voting. Anyway, this one lasted 2.5 hours, and it seemed more like a boxing match. That's what a lot of the French press are saying. The knives were drawn out. The local paper 20 Minutes says on its front page, coup pour coup. And it says it was a debate that was difficult to follow because of the, quote, uppercut punches thrown by both candidates. For the cartoonist Ronson, he says it was more like an American football match. In his illustration for Le Parisien newspaper, you see Marine Le Pen as the growling quarterback with the little defender Emmanuel Macron telling her to calm down, calm down.
And a lot of papers picking up on this sort of violent theme, the nastiness, criticizing it, and saying that it took the place of proper debate over policy.
That's right. It did really overshadow what should have been a debate about key electoral promises and their programs and so forth. It did really end up becoming a slanging match. Let's look at the front page of the left-leaning paper Libération. They say Bas du front, it says on the front page. It's actually a headline that's a play on words. Bas du front in French means somebody who's idiotic, the forehead that's lowered. It's somebody idiotic. In this case, Bas du front is idiotic, but in reference to the National Front Party, hence the word front. The paper essentially accuses Marine Le Pen of being too aggressive and of using words to deliberately insult her rival to gain populist favor. All this, the paper says, in an attempt to avoid the fact that she didn't have much of a campaign program and she wasn't able to elaborate on her key campaign promises. Le Monde says it was a debate in which attacks, insults, and denigrations were allowed. I quote there. The paper says, in the noisy cacophony, it's not really clear whether either candidate managed to be heard, nor whether, I quote, democracy even benefited from this debate. Of course, these debates that chance for both candidates to voice their opinions. Le Monde actually reminds us that back in 2002, Jacques Chirac, when he made it to the second round and was facing Jean-Marie Le Pen, he actually refused a debate face-to-face, saying, we don't debate with the far-right party. But 15 years later, it's clearly a different story. Macron never even thought for a second of not having this opportunity.
Yeah, the National Front now having so much of a vote share that it would have been impossible for him to avoid doing so. Now, of course, the paper's also looking at who won the debate in terms of viewer satisfaction.
Who won? Who was more convincing? Will, Le Parisien newspaper is asking this on its front page. Who was more convincing in that debate? It doesn't really give us their verdict, but the paper speaks of, quote, profound divergences exposed between Macron and Le Pen on issues like economy, national security, and the role of France in Europe, or the role of Europe in France. Macron held his own and even managed to impose himself. That's what the right-leaning paper Le Figaro says on its front page, noting that this front page was actually changed just about half an hour ago. It was changed to this. This was the old one, actually. This is the old one, but just earlier this morning, they actually changed it to reflect their view that Macron really held his own and even managed to impose himself. In its editorial, the paper says Marine Le Pen was a, quote, candidate of indignation. Macron was a candidate of solutions. The paper says the problem is undecided electors will be left feeling even more perplexed after this debate. It doesn't shed much light for them, and it's unclear whether this debate will even convince them to go to the polling booths, let alone to vote. The Huffington Post says for 63% of viewers, Macron was the winner from this debate. And the website calls the debate a one-of-a-kind in French presidential history, but not in a good way. Le Pen's cheap shots towards Macron and hyperbolic accusations only revealed her difficulty in defending her core electoral ideas. That's what the Huffington Post says.
Now, the right-wing paper L'Opinion speaks of a France that's incredibly divided right now.
Well, we've been seeing a lot of this kind of language in the lead up to the election. Divided France, and we saw this with those protests on the 1st of May. L'Opinion says on its front page, ça craque de partout. The cracks are starting to show everywhere, especially noting that in this extremely divisive election, even the Catholic Church has refused to formally endorse Emmanuel Macron, Whereas back in 2002, against Jean-Marie Le Pen, they were one of the first to come out and say, do not vote for the far-right party. Well, it's a different story this time. The paper says intellectuals, political parties, economists, unionists, and religious leaders are tearing each other apart.
And we shouldn't forget, there is a president in the Elysee right now. His name's François Hollande. He's a socialist, in case you forgot about him. And an article from L'Obs looking at the last few days of President Hollande's presidency.
That's right. We do know he's the first French president who is not standing for re-election. And Hollande's days in the Elysee Palace are numbered, of course, because unlike in the US, where there's this grace period before an inauguration in France, as soon as the new president is announced on Sunday, well, Hollande will have to move out. The new president comes in. And in this interview with L'Obs, the French president talks about his 5 years there, and he talks about things like the weather. He says rainy weather doesn't bother him. He also says he has some regrets that he wasn't more convincing and unifying as a president. He talks about being the most unpopular president in French history, to which he says, I'm on the verge of being loved now, maybe a little tongue-in-cheek. And he says he's not feeling melancholic about moving out. After all, he's just a, quote, temporary renter of the Elysee Palace. He says he's looking forward to being back in his own apartment. After all, the Elysee Palace gets lonely. And besides, he's looking forward to sitting on a terrace where, I quote, at least you can see passers-by.
All right, and possibly maybe some more reflections coming from perhaps, who knows, maybe a future book deal. Did we go wrong with the latest from the French papers? That's all for now from me. Stick around, more headlines coming up in just a moment's time.